Sure. It's just after this was held up. Yeah, that's what.
All right, it is 5:45. We'll call this meeting to order. Excuse me, welcome to the regular board meeting in the school district of the Menomonie area. And we'll start with roll call.
Amy Riddle Swanson.
Here.
Mark Gilman.
Here.
Angie Skillings. Here. Carl Palmer.
Here.
Abe Smith.
Here.
Dominique Stewart. Here. Rachel Henderson.
Here.
Dale Dalkey.
Here.
Amber Kirsting.
Here. We have a quorum. Let's stand for the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And our mission statement, the school district of the Menomonie area, by embracing the unique needs and using the strengths of our diverse community, is dedicated to preparing all students to become lifelong learners, caring individuals, and responsible citizens. Right. The agenda order, do we have any proposed revisions tonight?
I'd like to propose a revision to the agenda. Item 5C, which is discuss preliminary budget for 24-25 and potential budget reductions. I think it'd be a good idea to move that before the action agenda so that we can kind of discuss the entire budgetary framework and what we're looking at in terms of potential reductions before getting into the details of specific decisions.
All right, so you would be moving that before all of section 4.
Yes, I'm proposing moving 5C just prior to section 4.
And we do not need a vote on this, correct? Yeah, is there any objections to that? All right, seeing none. Any other proposed revisions to the agenda? Yeah?
I would like to move, let's see, I think it is 4C. Employee contracts, I'd like to take the district administrator and put it in for a closed session, please.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Right, moving on, we have some recommendations and commendations tonight. Our first recommendation is for Tyler Miller. Come on up. All right, Mr. Tyler Miller exemplifies professionalism, collaboration, and dedication in his role as a school psychologist, supporting Menomonie High School and Knapp Elementary. Tyler actively collaborates with staff members, contributing valuable insights and expertise to support student success. He goes above and beyond to establish rapport and trust, creating a safe space where students feel valued and supported. His accessibility and willingness to offer guidance and assistance have made a positive impact on countless individuals within our school community. And we also have commendations acknowledging our departing board members tonight. Everyone want to come stand up?
No.
One last time. Oops. Let's fight for it. All right. All right. Thank you so much, Mark Hellman and Angie Skillings and Carl Palmer for your board service from 2021 to 2024. I miss you all. I really appreciate all the work that you put into the board. Oh, thanks. Okay, moving on. We have our highlight on youth for the month of April. You want to say anything about that?
Yes, that's one.
All right.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, the highlight on youth report, just like the other months, is available in board docs for anybody in the public to see. It's been another great month in the school district, and I promise to try not to take as much information from the high school students away. Don't want to be too repetitive, but just super proud. The National Honor Society had their inductees for the 2024 class in the high school. We also at the middle school, the 8th grade class, the students who attended the Red Cedar Watershed Conference presented to the Rotary Club of Menomonie about what they learned at that conference, and there's information there about that. I attended that presentation, and their students, and also Miss Rachel Scott, our teacher from the middle school, did a terrific job. In terms of the elementary schools, I like how Downsville Elementary highlighted students that were caught using kind words throughout the week and were recognized. At Knapp Elementary School, the 3rd graders had a geography fair. Oak Lawn Elementary School, there's a 4th and 5th grade concert. Huge success, complete with ukuleles, boom whackers, and a black light to illuminate the final song. At River Heights Elementary School, the 4th and 5th grade students had a 1950s themed music concert. And at Wakanda Elementary School, there's a real nice picture of a snow angel. We finally did have some snow, and we had a snow day. I know people were really hoping for a snow day. I don't think we need any more. But also, there was a donation drive for stepping stones in the Wakanda Elementary report. So you can view the whole report on board docs, but great job to all of our students, staff, and building principals. Well done.
Thank you. And next up, we have our student representatives here to share with us what's going on in high schools.
Good evening, members of the school board. We are honored to stand before you once again to share some remarkable updates on the recent achievements and endeavors of our school community.
Indeed, we have much to celebrate, starting with the outstanding performance of our choral students who competed in the Wisconsin State Music Association Solo Ensemble Festival, held at Eau Claire North High School over the weekend. Despite the stiff competition, all 7 of our participating students received at least an excellent score with an impressive 7 out of 10 events, earning a 1 star, securing their advancement to the state festival at the UW Eau Claire campus on May 4th.
Furthermore, let us extend our heartfelt congratulations to Cody Chen, a member of our band. Cody's exceptional talent and dedication have earned him a spot as a trombone player in the WSMA Honors All-State Orchestra. This prestigious recognition not only highlights Cody's musical talent, but also shines a spotlight on our school's commitment to nurturing excellence in the arts.
In addition to our musical achievements, we're thrilled to report on the participation of 7 members of our student council in the WASC State Leadership Conference. Over the weekend, they immersed themselves in a dynamic learning environment, gaining invaluable insights into leadership, forging connections with peers from across Wisconsin, and brainstorming innovative ideas for the future of our council.
Our forensics team continues to excel with the largest group ever qualifying for the state competition scheduled for April 19th and 20th. This remarkable achievement reflects the dedication and talent within our forensics program.
Additionally, our Future Business Leaders of America chapter is currently competing at the state level. As we eagerly await their results, we commend their hard work and preparation leading up to this moment. We have no doubt that they will represent our school with the same level of excellence and professionalism that they have consistently demonstrated.
These accomplishments serve as a testament to the dedication, talent, and spirit of collaboration that define our school community. We are immensely proud of the achievements of our students and grateful for the support of our faculty and community partners.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here tonight and for all of your updates. Next up, we have community communications. It looks like we have 2 speakers signed up for this evening. First is Josie Coleman.
Joseph Gilman. And I'm from the Adam. Dr. Zadowski and members of the board. Chloe lives in California. She was under 10 when she began to go through puberty. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw things she didn't like. She was a tomboy and thought she might like to be a boy instead of the girl she was designed to be. In the public school, she was directed to counselors and teachers who lied to her, telling her that she could begin to change into a boy if she wanted. It would even be good for her mental health if she did. She later learned that when her parents were brought into the conversation, they were told, "Do you want a dead daughter or a live son?" You know, some transitioners commit suicide in their distress. Of course, they were not told of the numerous risks when a little girl begins to take hormone blockers to stop the normal development of a girl becoming a woman. She is also given testosterone, a male hormone, to trick her body into thinking it is a man. The voice lowers, more hair grows, and the soft curves change into bulky muscles. All of these things began to happen to Chloe. She helped along the deceit so that by the time she entered middle school, she had changed her name, hairstyle, and clothing to make her look like a young man. Disgustingly, she began to use the boys' bathroom. Chloe was not happy. Thinking that top surgery would help, she went ahead with that. Chloe reflects that this was painful and completely ineffective in making her into a man or giving her mental stability. She commented that now she will never be able to nurse her children if she is ever able to have children. Somewhere around 15, Chloe realized what she had done to herself. She began to detransition. Miraculously, her voice turned to near normal for a woman. Bulky muscles softened and her cycle returned. She began to change her hairstyle and clothing back to that of a woman and never wants to enter a boy's bathroom again. Chloe is now only 19 and has the courage to travel around sharing her story. I heard her speak at Stout. Is she sterile? Someone asked her. She does not know. Chloe deeply regrets what she did to her body. She deserved to have a trusted adult, a teacher or a friend who had the courage to tell her the truth about her sexuality. Many students passing through puberty suffer from gender confusion. Regardless, they need to know the truth. In time, the issues generally resolve on their own. Respectfully.
Thank you. And our second speaker tonight is Rebecca Hoffman.
Thank you. Members of the Menomonie School Board, I implore you to bravely take into consideration the Word of God when we are talking about gender identity. And God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. There should be no confusion.
Thank you. Next up on the agenda, we have revenue and expenditure reports for the month ended March 2024.
Okay, we'll take a look at the revenue report first. Some items to note for the month of March, we received in our fifth special education aid payment. We also received in our third equalization aid payment. We received in our per pupil aid that comes in every March. And then also local revenues from fees and such, and also grant revenues. So for our total fund 10, the general fund, we received in through the end of March, $19,030,709.24. In our gift donation fund 21, we received in $596,841.61. And then for our special education fund total, we received in $1,620,988.31. Moving on to the next report, I'd like to take a look at the expenditures by function first. And this report is just looking at our general operations fund, Fund 10. Overall, year-to-date percent spent we're at 48.85. Compared to the same time last year, we were at 51.72. So slightly under where we're at this year compared to last year. In Fund 27, that's up slightly from last year. We're at 61.79 as compared to 60.91. And then for food service, our Fund 50, we're at 55.83% compared to 59.55. Nothing unusual for the month in the general fund, just normal expenditures, one time of purchases and billing could differ from one year to the next. And then the last report is a look at our expenses broken down by object, and this includes all the funds combined. And this year, we're at the end of March, at 52.58% compared to 54.63. So overall, just slightly less than we were at the same time last year, but you have to take into account, again, the timing of bills being paid from one year to the next. Maybe some are paid in March, some are paid early April. Any questions?
I have just a couple of questions about the, and the expense by function. I know you said it's mostly due to sort of the timing of certain bills, but I noticed that the Fund 27 is a little bit up from last year. And I know that at the last meeting, we had a discussion about sort of the increase in students in this district who are with IEPs, right? Is that more or less true? Is that contributing to the increase in spending in that? And that won't, like, is the way that the timing of special ed aid payments, like, will it take into consideration that like increase in spending before the end of the school year? Or are we sort of like capped at what we budgeted when they reimburse?
We are reimbursed for this year's expenses next year. So it lags funding.
Okay, I was just curious how that looked. I also, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but there's a pretty big increase or overage in the apparel payment, and I was just wondering if that also corresponds to a revenue increase like in fees, or what the connection is there?
For the apparel accounts, those, within that line item is our student activity funds. And so they oftentimes will fundraise and get donations and will, I've seen an uptick in the number of apparel items being purchased through the student activity, the different groups, whether it be athletics or music or what have you. And so that will vary from year to year, depending on how much money they raise to cover the costs.
So even though it looks like overage and expensive, it's accompanied by revenue from somewhere.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel, to your point, and I can't remember if I had shared with the board the number of new students coming in.
Last meeting.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite something. I don't think people realize that we have 264 new students this year during the school year, 68 of which receive special education services. So I think that fits in with the budget.
Any other questions about the revenue and expenditure reports?
Expense by object, the trust fund expenses look up year to date, looking backwards. Is anything as well, or is there something different?
That could be timing. If you look at 21, 22, it's more in line with that one. Last year, there could have been some higher claims that came through for the self-funded health insurance piece that's included in that line item.
All right, moving on, we have our monthly employment report.
So this report is a standing agenda item. You can see that as we start to head towards the end of the school year, there are beginning to be more changes with the employment report. You can see there's a number of resignations. Some are during the school year, some are effective at the end of the year, and then there's a number of new hires. Unless there's any questions, this is for the board's information.
Any questions about the March employment report? All right. Next up, we have our consent agenda. Entertain a motion to the consent agenda.
So moved.
Seconded.
All right, motion by Angie, second by Amber. Consent agenda includes minutes from the regular board meeting of March 18th, 2024, financial reports, general fund checks in the amount of $2,604,049, and cash receipts in the amount of $7,222,333 for March 2024. There are no donations exceeding $1,000 at this time, and we also have approval for the national travel for the 2025 NHS choir trip. Getting out ahead of that one. Any questions about the consent agenda?
I do have one tiny thing in the agenda, or in the minutes from 3:18. Under the discussion, item E, under employee compensation, the last sentence, after a long discussion, the board agreed on a 4.12 total compensation increase across all employee groups. We'll consider it for approval at the next meeting. I would like to change that to the board discussed. 4.12 compensation increase, and we'll consider it for approval. I think it just reads too much as though it was a decision made in the discussion item.
I also have a question about monthly summary. Let's see, it's under, I don't know, it's under, let me back up here. It's under monthly essay summary for March. Okay. I didn't understand the columns very much. For instance, let's see if I can pick something out that is kind of fuzzy to me. Beginning balance and ending balance and the monthly activity didn't always seem to mesh. I'm having trouble finding one that I can refer to. Let's see, I had it circled with home, but well, I might have to come back and talk to you about that later because I'm having trouble finding what I circled before, but there were just some, I just didn't understand the math involved in those three columns. Wait, here's one, the music, way down, number 23, it's titled just middle school music. Beginning balance, 10,630, monthly activity, 10,657, ending balance, 7,000.
Yep, that could be like the activity is the expenses being paid out, but it's not, this report isn't taking into account the revenues being deposited into the same account. So while those are the expenses, it's also being received in revenues coming in.
Okay,
So-
so the revenue's not being shown. Because there were several other ones that were similar to that, but that explains.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions about the consent agenda? Seeing none, let's vote. And motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have the personnel consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the personnel consent agenda.
So moved, Dave.
Second.
Motion by Abe, second by Amber. So we have a handful of resignations and one request to hire tonight. Are there any questions or discussion on the personnel consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, let's vote. All right, and the motion passes unanimously. So next up, per our revision to the agenda, we will discuss preliminary budget for 2024-25 and potential budget reductions. So that is, that will be discussion item 5C to pull up.
Okay, so at the last school board meeting, the board reviewed the first look at the preliminary budget. And just to review the timeline behind this, we have until the summer to have the board approve the preliminary budget. Typically, that's done in June, and then the preliminary budget is then published and brought to the annual meeting in August. And then in October, once we know our enrollment counts, state aid certifications, and all the information that we'll receive from the state in October, that's when the board will set the final budget for the 2024-2025 school year. As we know though, looking at this initial estimate, it is looking like there is going to be a pretty significant deficit. Over $3 million is what the numbers look like right now. And this is no surprise with the referendum from February 20th not passing. As the board discussed at the last meeting and directed the administrative team to develop a list of possible budget reductions to consider not only moving into this year, but also what it could like moving into the future. So that list was developed. It still is in process, but board members, you can see that we've identified over $9 million of potential reductions. I do need to point out that some of the reductions, because they are in a leveled list in 4 different levels, some of them are repetitive within the list. For instance, and we can go through as much detail on this list as you would like to talk about tonight, but perhaps the largest reduction would be in the level 3 when we tried to cost out what it would save in terms of dollars if Knapp Elementary and Downsville Elementary were closed. So that's, over 2 million, I think it's about 2.3, 2.4 million. But there's other reductions in the list. Whereas if smaller classes in those buildings were combined, there's a figure for that. If the principal positions in those 2 were split, there's a figure for that. So when you look at the total dollar at the bottom, when it says 9.6 million, that you have to understand that includes multiple options. In some cases, if you close Knapp and Downsville, you wouldn't also be able to achieve the savings from those other reductions. So there is some repetition that has to be considered, but the point is there's millions of dollars of potential budget reductions on the table for the board to review tonight. From there, I guess I will take direction from the board on how you would like to go through this and have a further discussion.
Is it safe to say that what's currently under level 1 reductions are changes that you would recommend for the coming school year?
I would definitely say that the level 1 reductions are the reductions that we felt would have the least impact on current programming and immediate impact on students and staff. And if you'd like, I could go through those, Rachel.
Sure.
So the level 1 reductions that we identified total $1.89 million. And most of these are just changes to how we budget. And as the board knows, we typically have budgeted fairly conservatively in our district, trying to protect our district from different changes in the environment. When we talk about the cost of goods, the cost of fuel, and things like that. So when we look at these budget items, and then Leah did a great job with her team, kind of looking at trends over years and trying to identify where there's areas in the budget where we feel like we might be overestimating a bit, and there's been a trend of doing that. Some of those items, we do carry a $250,000 budget contingency in each annual budget. We never know when we're going to have some new students that move in that have some significant needs that might need additional staffing or additional equipment. Like we talked about with the special education funding, that funding is delayed by a year. So that $250,000 is something that could be taken out of the budget. The challenge with doing that, though, is that if we have unanticipated expenses, we don't have that cushion there. So we would be going right to fund balance with that. Another area is our health insurance budget. As you know, we made significant changes to our health insurance plan. We have a self-funded plan, and we went to a high deductible plan beginning on January 1, 2024. As we're looking at the trends early on in the year, and also working with our consultants, we think that the 3% that we budgeted for increases next year, we feel like we could take that out of the budget and probably be okay with health insurance. The utilities budget, primarily gas and electric, we feel that that budget can be reduced by $136,000. And again, that's looking at budget trends. Hopefully the price of fuel does not spike like we saw a few years ago, but we do think that that is a reasonable gamble. Our substitute budget for hiring subs across the district, we feel we could reduce that budget item by $130,000. Part of that is just the fact that subs are hard to find, and we have had a number of positions that have gone unfilled, meaning that people within the building, cover for each other or work during their preparatory time. But $136,000 when we look at, $130,000 when we look at that budget, we think could be reduced. Same would be with summer school budget, $115,000. The transportation budget, $100,000. And the youth service officer, that is an agreement we have with the city of Menomonie. There are collective bargaining issues with the city that allows an officer to only be in that position for a certain number of years. Because of that, we have had a new officer assigned, and depending on the cost of that officer, that changes the cost of that program. So we can reduce that budget $15,700. Some of the other ones on the list are not just budget transfers or budget reductions. An example of that would be the French program that was discussed at the last meeting. Our French teacher, who's been with us for a long time, is retiring, and that's a reduction that could save the district $120,000 if we went to one foreign language instead of two. And then in working with our staff committee, the QIC committee, we were able to identify technology support in terms of having building tech coaches, people in the building that are teachers in most cases, that are receiving additional contracts to provide technology support to their colleagues. That model, we feel, has kind of outgrown itself. There's still value in it, but if we have to start trimming things, that's $32,724 that our staff committee felt that we could reduce. And so that brings the total of those level one reductions to $1.89 million. When we start looking at level 2 and 3, then I think we're starting to really see where the rubber hits the road in terms of opportunities for students and the environment, the work environment that we have for our staff. I certainly can go through those as well if you'd like, but are there any questions on level 1 first?
I think you forgot at the top, the eliminate
Thank you.
contribution to 146.
I did, and that's the big one. And the reason why I skipped that one is that's not like the other budget reductions that were done in terms of just looking at trends. If we look at the annual budget and the investment that the school district has been making for future capital improvement needs, $810,000 out of the annual budget is put into Fund 46 to take care of roofs, to take care of boilers, to take care of all the technology in the school district. And that one is something that could be taken out of next year's budget. Unlike the other ones though, that really is kicking the can down the road. You all know that we have a very good 30-year capital improvement plan where we're trying to plan ahead for all the different expenses. I mean, when we talk about having 7 schools and, you know, this building as well, there are a lot of capital expenses that need to be planned for. And what a lot of school districts do is they go to, and they have a capital referendum, and they do that about every 10 years or so, and then they try to do all the projects at once. Our school district has taken a different approach and tried to plan ahead, but doing so puts pressure on the annual budget. And, you know, that Fund 46, you know, right now is funded out about 10 years. If contributions are frozen, I don't think it's gonna make it that long. But that is something we could do in the short term, is make no further contribution to Fund 46, and then, you know, use what's in there, you know, like the board did with the swimming pool project, you know, kind of tore that project apart and really prioritize the most pressing needs. The challenge is you're kicking those other things down the road. But that's $810,000. Thank you, Amy. I did fail to mention that one. Any other questions on level 1?
Can I ask about that same, in regards to the contribution to Fund 46? Would it be an option to, rather than all or nothing, say cut that number in half and lessen the contribution and still have a significant savings to the budget?
The board can choose whatever figure the board wants to put into Fund 46. And that's also something, contributions to Fund 46 can actually be made after the end of the fiscal year. The fiscal year for the school district runs from July 1st to June 30th. And in order for contributions for Fund 46 to be counted as a shared expense and thus aided by the state in the following year's budget, that transfer needs to be made by July 31st. So the board does have full discretion on that. Really, the only caveat is that we have to have the capital improvement plan. I think the state law says 10 years. Ours is 30 years, so we tripled the requirement on that. But yes, Amber, there's a lot of flexibility there.
I think since, as you point out, level 1 adds up to about $1.89 million. We're talking about roughly $3 million deficit just next year and growing in years past that. So it's why we're looking at discussing what's on level 2, because those actually will have, is it government road kind of situations.
I think instead of trying to group them, in my mind, I'm just gonna go through the list so I don't leave one out again. And these are just listed in the estimated savings, in order of estimated savings. So the first item in the level 2 reductions would be to limit wage and salary increases for the 2024-2025 school year, just to the steps that have been earned by employees. That would have an estimated savings of $522,463. If we were to try to combine some of the smaller classes at Knapp and Downsville Elementary School, we may be able to reduce 2 FTE or 2 teachers for an estimated savings of $132,000. Do you want me to talk about the impact of these as I go through them instead of coming back? Or do you want me just to go through the list?
I personally think talking about the impact is useful. However you want to organize your thoughts is
Okay.
fine. I think we should talk about
So I'm gonna back up then to the first one about limiting the wage and salary increases for next year to the earned steps. I really think, and I implore the board to at least pay for the earned steps. I think if the board freezes all wages, I think we are going to see a significant issue with the ability to recruit and retain staff, to even fill our staff for next year. It is a very competitive environment, not just in schools. It's a competitive employment market all across the economy right now. But in schools, when we're talking about teacher shortages and we're talking about keeping the integrity of our pay systems, I think at least paying for the steps the board needs to do. Now, the board could save about $500,000 by leaving it at just the earned steps. But I think the board needs to understand that across the area, school districts are going to be providing increases, and the CPI, the inflationary marker for next year is 4.1. 4.12, I believe, is that correct, Leah? So if we just pay the steps, that's about a 1.9, so that's about, more than 2% less than what most schools are going to be doing. So not only, does it have a problem for next year, but you never really get an opportunity to make that up. So I think when you look at the future of Menomonie trying to stay competitive, with being able to recruit and retain staff for working with our kids, I think that's something the board needs to consider carefully. When we talk about combining small classes at Knapp and Downsville, physically it can be done. We do have a couple pockets, they're not the same grade level, but we do have a couple pockets in Knapp and Downsville where we probably could reduce one teacher in each of those schools. But doing so would put the class sizes for those combined grades near the top of our expectations for our class size policy. We would still be under the total of what the policy calls for, but we would be putting two very large classes together, and they would be multi-age classes, which is more work for our teachers, and it also changes the experience for the kids. Now, there can be some benefits to multi-age classes, but I would say with that number of students, those benefits of having a multi-age together would be limited, but that is something that's possible. The next item would be to eliminate our high school English language arts interventionist. That is a relatively new position. The person working in that position this year is retiring. What I will say though is that out of our 7 schools, the high school is the school that we feel needs the greatest attention in terms of student achievement. And that's reflected in our school report card. There's a lot of great things going on at the high school, but we know that we need to improve our achievement scores in both math and in English language arts. I would say that we have not reached maximum effectiveness with that position this year. We are looking forward to, I really appreciate the hard work of the person who was in that position. But I also think sometimes, moving a classroom teacher into that position might not be ideal. Whereas next year we would have a fresh start in terms of hiring someone with the skill set specific for that position. And talking with Brian, and talking with Mr. Drake, and talking with Mrs. Ellison, our region specialist, we still think there's value there, and we still think that that could have a good impact on student achievement. However, reducing that position could save the district about $93,000, and that's an estimated figure. Next on the list would be reducing health assistance in our elementary schools. Currently, our 3 large elementary schools each have a health assistant to help with all the medicine administration, small scale injuries, sick students, all sorts of things. You can imagine how busy those offices are with over 400 students needing attention for health matters. Those were added a few years back, and we could drop that down. Instead of having 3, we could have 1, and have one person try to serve the 3 buildings. But that would save $84,000, but it would come at less service and support for students, putting more pressure on the office clerical, the building principals, and our teachers. Next on the list would be reducing music staffing at the middle school. That would be a savings estimated at $66,978. We did operate with one band teacher for several years at the middle school, but enrollment in that program has been terrific. And also the ability to have, what am I trying to say, more effective instruction and better music coming out of the middle school. It's been pretty obvious the positive impact that that second band teacher has had. And I see Mr. Betcher back there shaking his head yes. Next on the list would be reducing a clerical staff member at Menomonie High School, estimated savings of $51,800. But again, we're talking about our largest building, and we're talking about clerical staffing that really works directly with our students. Also, if those duties need to be reallocated, it would be less support for our staff. But reducing clerical at the high school is on the list. We looked at our sports offerings, and even though there's not a lot of dollars associated with the sports programs, our athletic director looked at the two sports that have the lowest participation, girls gymnastics and boys soccer. With Title IX and with the importance of providing opportunities for all genders in our school district, the lowest participation with the girls program would be gymnastics. The lowest participation with the boys program would be soccer. The estimated savings would be $36,000. I want to point out though that if we eliminate girls gymnastics and eliminate boys soccer, I would anticipate losing at least a few students to open enrollment to schools that offer those programs. And when you look at our revenue, which is primarily based on student enrollment, it would only take a few kids to open enroll out, and this reduction in budget would probably be eclipsed by the loss of revenue in losing students. Field trips, we reduced and eliminated our field trips. There is a potential savings of $35,135. Right now, we ensure that all students have the opportunity to utilize the environmental site in our school district. But if we were to eliminate the field trip budget, we would not have funding for the buses to take them out there, and really losing a terrific resource, educational resource for our students. We provide $100 per teacher for classroom consumables each year. If we were to eliminate that, there is a potential savings of over $25,000. I know our teachers already pay out of pocket for a number of items, and I really think that eliminating that $100 per teacher for classroom consumables would be problematic to the culture and climate of our schools, and also would impact what is provided for our students in the classrooms. When we look at admissions and passes, we could increase the cost to go to different school events. We could increase the price of the family passes that we offer. It's a pretty small revenue. About $15,000 is what we would estimate if we increase the cost of those. The next one, also increasing facility use fees, we think about $10,000 could be raised by increasing the cost of use of our facility. I will say that this is probably going to be, both of these would be directly passed on to the families and community members that are very supportive of our schools. So I don't like those solutions, but I do think there's something to consider. Another thing with the way schools are funded, huge issue, but those would both be considered deductible receipts. So when we have our total spending for the year, the spending that's considered shared expense is the spending that determines our state aid for the following year. Well, that shareable expense figure, you have to reduce that figure by the number of deductible receipts you have. So all the aids, the aid revenue that we receive from football games, basketball games, whatever, the rental fees that from people renting our facilities, that comes off the top. So you still would achieve this revenue, But then when you look at the state aid that we receive, it would be taken out of that equation. So about 15% would be put on the local property taxpayer instead of being funded by the state. It's pretty small dollars when you look at $25,000 and you consider the whole district budget. At the same time, just know that it's about 15 cents on a dollar that you're losing in terms of state aid if you try to solve this budget problem through increasing these things that would be deductible receipts. We do a number of things for our staff in terms of recognition, holiday gifts and such. It doesn't add up to much. It's about $6,000 for the entire staff for the entire year. But that's something that could be eliminated. We could increase student activity fees and require families to pay more to have their students participate in activities. That could raise about $5,000 of revenue. And then we also provide, a staff shirt every year. They're just simple T-shirts, but it's really a great way to build camaraderie with our staff. And I know I see those T-shirts all over our school district, but that could eliminate about $4,400 worth of expense. So that whole level 2, the level 1 was about 1.89 million. Level 2 is just over $1 million. But like Abe said, when we're looking at about a $3 million deficit, level 1, level 2, and probably even some of level 3 would need to be considered if the board wants to ensure that the budget is balanced.
Any questions about the level 2 reduction list? Or any of it, for that matter?
I think you mentioned this already, and I apologize for making you speak so long, but
No,
I think it's very important to go over these.
Yep.
I don't want you to go over all level 3 before, that's way too much. There's a lot of detailers in another 2 pages, or another page and a half, but I think there are some big items, say the ones over, 100, 200K, that might be worth just mentioning that they're on there, for people to kind of see the scope of what, once you get past that 2.9 million dollars of level 1, level 2, the things we're really hitting that are pretty significant.
Well, and that's just it. When we put these in levels, we also try to consider what's possible for next year. When you look at level 3, so far in level 1 and level 2, we identified about $2.9 million. Well, almost that same amount could be saved by closing that and down to elementary. That's a rough estimate of about 2.4 million. The reason why we had those in level 3 is because we really don't think it's feasible to make that big of a change before next school year. It is possible to fit all the students from Knapp and Downsville into our buildings that we currently have. I can tell you right now, we would be splitting families. You could have a family with one student going to Wakanda, one student going to River Heights, one student going to Oaklawn. And then in terms of how they actually fit into class sizes, that's a whole nother issue. Because within our existing buildings in town, there are some classes that cannot house another student without adding another teacher. So I think a lot more planning and work would actually have to be done before closing Knapp and Downsville. So I would say that 2025, 2026 school year would be the earliest that really should be done, if that's something that the board chooses. But at the same time, when you look at how many things would have to be reduced to get to that dollar figure, I do think that's something the board may want to look at, depending on, what happens with revenue. The other large ones, like you talked about, Abe, and I do think that these are things that could be considered. Reducing sectioning and increasing class sizes across the school district. We figure we could eliminate about 6 teaching positions and still offer, all the classes that we have. There might be more scheduling conflicts, especially at the high school, but that would save about $500,000. If we look specifically at the high school, another thing to consider is that right now our high school teachers teach 11 sections during the school day, meaning that one semester they teach 5 sections and the other semester they teach 6. But they also have supervision time, but really we call it more of not intervention time, but almost more of a homeroom time during the study hall period. The idea is that the teachers during the study hall period are working with their students. That is oftentimes when student intervention takes place to provide students who need additional support. But it's also when our class meetings take place. Students have special projects, also our academic and career planning takes place. But I do think that's something that requiring all high school teachers to teach 12 sections, 6 sections in each semester, is something that could result in us being able to eliminate some positions and save probably around $400,000. Other ones like the elementary math interventionist, in each of our elementary schools in town here, we have a full-time math interventionist. Those are 3 teachers that work specifically with students who need help on math to get them up to grade level. That's about $290,000. And then other things aren't quite as large, but eliminating some school counseling positions. We could eliminate the use of teacher subs at the middle school. I would definitely not recommend that, but something like that could be considered.
Joe, I just want to say that I don't like any of those in level 2, and I like level 3 even less. But earlier you talked about the head count, and as I look at that closing of Math Elementary in Downsville, how it might affect some of the people who voted no in the last referendum, I think there is a real possibility of loss of students there. You think from math, it's 4 miles to Boyceville. It's 10 miles to the high school from math. It's 12 miles to the middle school from math. Now, if you were a parent, with busing available to Boyceville, it doesn't make too tough of a decision to decide that maybe if we're going to close that school, we'll send our kids to Boyceville, or London City for that matter, for some of them that are on the edge. And there might be a similar situation in Downsville. We could easily lose 100 students, or maybe more. And so I think that has to be entered into the equation.
I would also say with it, back on what he said, transportation to those areas to town could also, maybe it would even out, because I know they have to transport them out there now, but and then to bring them into the city schools, I don't know if that would, have any impact with the transportation against us.
When we looked at transportation, we think the cost would be relatively similar because the buses are going from town out and then back. What would really change though is the student experience. To put 6-year-olds on a bus for that long, especially if we have to move students around to try to fit them in to space at various elementary schools, it's potentially you could have a student living in Knapp that would have to travel all the way to Oakland or something like that. Certainly we would try to use Wakanda, and we would try to map that out the best that we can, but again, with the space considerations and the whole purpose would be to reduce the budget. We won't want to just add a bunch of teachers at Wakanda, or we're kind of defeating the purpose. And there's really not enough space to do that anyway. I think the student experience would change significantly.
Joe, what do we know about the instructional load piece, especially a little bit less so about the sectioning, increasing class sizes, but again, with teacher retention in the market that we're in, as a change from the 12 to 11, something that a third of the teachers say, forget it, I'm going to a neighboring district where I don't have the same number of sections, and am I asking that correctly?
Yeah,
I think seen as significant to the teaching experience.
I think the teachers at the high school would certainly see that as significant. And in a number of cases, not only would it be adding another period of teaching, in many cases it would be a whole other period of prepping. we would certainly try to group the classes and such where it would be another section of a class the teacher is already teaching. But you know there would be situations where it would be a different course. So they would have a whole nother course to prepare for. It's hard to predict. I do know that it would be not well received by the high school staff. And I would expect that we would see some resignations over it.
How would it compare industry-wide? If I went to 10 high schools in the area, would all of them be teaching 11 sections or the equivalent? They're probably on different models, but how standard is that?
I think it varies quite a bit. Brian, I don't know if you or Sam would have any comment on that. We might have to do some more research on it, but
Yeah, I would agree, we want to research it before we made it definitive. Different high schools in the region are going to have slightly different schedules. Some have assigned supervisions, as opposed to not having those. Their intervention models will look different as well. But I think it's safe to say that our load at our high school probably more closely matches those at other high schools than being the exception to that.
and I think we would have to go into it knowing, Carl, that it would be a strict teach 6, 1 prep period, and 1 supervision period. And that supervision period would essentially just be, in the classroom with the kids supervising. I don't think we could expect our teachers to provide the academic support, the intervention services, all these things that they're doing during the current study hall homeroom period, the academic career planning. I don't think that we would be able to have additional instructional expectations on our teachers if we were to have them teach 6 sections. It would be 6 sections of teaching, 1 section of supervision, and 1 section of preparatory time.
I guess my experience at the university, instructor at the university level, we had several times when we discussed both pay cuts or pay freezes versus workload increases. And universally, workload increases were despised to the point, you could imagine, staff meetings that were up in arms, people shouting, et cetera. Because, at least in my experience personally, if people feel their salary is lagging or not where it should be, they often can find a way to scrape by, right? People often can budget dollars in various ways. But when your time is the thing that's taken up, there's no way to get that back with clever budgeting, right? You just have less, you have more work to do and less time, and there's no, that is not something you can budget around. So that's my personal experience.
I will say that the productivity during the homeroom study hall time does vary. I think the majority of our teachers at the high school do a terrific job. In fact, I think they go well beyond the homeroom study hall time to provide students with additional help, support, and instruction. But I also know that there are some teachers where this needs to be improved, and that's something that Mr. Drake and his team at the high school are working on. I'm optimistic that it's going to get better and better. If it doesn't, then I think perhaps this is a recommendation that could be considered in the future. I would not advise to consider it right now.
I agree with Dale that, level 2 and level 3 reductions, especially most of them are pretty unpalatable. When you face the question of how do they affect actual academics or student experience, those are the 2 big ones. And when you do start to look at staff retention, that's the other one. And while, changes to wage, freezing wages, things like that, do save a large dollar amount because basically we're a people business in the school. The other part we haven't talked about yet is that we are sitting on cash. And what the amount of cash we should be sitting on is up for debate, probably across numbers of people. And I know that some folks in the community said, hey, you have cash. We do have cash. So, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to make the kind of cuts that will affect students when there is cash on hand. And if you spend the cash till it's gone, that's one approach. And then it does make some of these things inevitable if something else doesn't happen, another referendum, a change to state aid, whatever. I think, and I won't be here when it's time for the June budget, but I think you have to be very careful not to make the most drastic cuts before you absolutely have to, considering the possible outcomes.
One thing I caution the board on though is that I don't think this is gonna get better. The way state funding for public education in Wisconsin is, unless there is a local referendum passed, I don't see the state providing enough revenue for us not to have to make reductions in the future. And if you just look at the Big Rivers Conference, which Menomonie is part of, Chippewa Falls last week, and I'm very happy for them, they just passed a $7.5 million referendum, 3 years, so $2.5 million a year. New Richmond just passed a $113.7 million capital referendum. River Falls, February 20th, when Menomonie's failed, passed 2 referendums. A $3 million stepped up recurring operating referendum. So it's gonna step up to $3 million, and they're gonna have $3 million of additional revenue, into the future. And they passed a $28 million capital referendum. Now, Eau Claire, they've gone to referendum a number of times. I think 2 years ago was the most recent one. That was a capital referendum. Their board has already voted to hold a referendum in November, and that'll be an operating referendum. Boyceville just passed a referendum. There was an $18 million capital referendum that just passed last week. So when we talk about our staff and we talk about pay, and we talk about making these cuts, I know if I was a teacher and all these schools around pass referendums and they're gonna have enough revenue to pay their staff and keep their buildings up, I think that's a big issue that the board needs to consider. And I know the referendum Menomonie had, I understand the concerns that some of the residents had. It was a big ask, $4.2 million recurring. But I think if more revenue is not part of the equation, I think these cuts are gonna be needed.
I think to your point though, Carl, it's not as if the entire list, which involves also a section 4 we can get into for sake of a lot of detail, but the level 4, so to speak, is things that you discussed with the team but aren't recommending in any sense. You're saying these are things that were discussed, and I think it's very. I almost see this list as depending on what the board decides and how the future plays out, and maybe not quite in this order, but we're going to be crawling down this list over time, because the coming year is $3 million. Assuming nothing changes, it grows to, getting close to 4, getting close to 5 over a couple of years. And so to reach those numbers, we're going to be crawling down this list step by step with hard decisions throughout. And I think that's why I wanted to have this discussion first before the other agenda items, because it's so important to look at the entire, we're looking at a few years maybe of very careful decisions about these things, maybe just 1 year, maybe 2 years in some cases. But there's a lot of things to think about and balance in terms of values and priorities.
We might be stepping down that list, but only if we don't pass the referendum. And if we pass the referendum, like Joe alluded to, if we go to the voters and we talk about dipping into that balance, that fund that's been very helpful in the past, but that was one of the concerns that we heard from the community. We can dip into that a little bit, and as you've got on level 1, the Fund 46, those 2 things, that would help, I think, a lot of the no voters to see that we are meeting them halfway. If we were very upfront with specific cuts that will be made in case the referendum didn't pass, that was the other concern that I heard, that we weren't specific enough. Maybe some of those people didn't come to our forums, but whatever. So be real specific. You've got them laid out, level 1, 2, 3. It's pretty easy to make those cuts available to the public. If we eliminate the recurring and go for a 3 or a 4-year type of referendum. That was the other concern that I think we heard, that if we could just kind of meet them halfway with going for a 3 or 4-year, I think that would be a big step. What else did we hear? We heard be specific about how these additional funds are going to be used. And I think the reason we didn't make a big deal about that is because there isn't anything new that's going to be used for those funds. It was just to balance the budget, but we got the budget, let's just put it out there, and this is how those funds are going to be used if we pass this referendum in November. And I think we just have to focus on that and not focus on the negativity of levels 2 and 3. And and the other thing that would be meeting the public would be the level 1 cuts that you've already proposed. That I think, I'll speak for myself, I think I could support those.
I would just like to say that we might have some money in our contingency fund, and it might help us stay status quo for maybe a year, or maybe a little more than a year. But you know what? Once that's gone, we have nothing. So we need to be cognizant of that, because, it's like in your own home, if you have a savings account, and something catastrophic happens, you've got to start tightening your belt, same thing.
So I guess that was along the lines of what I was gonna say, to kind of add into what Carl said. The 810,000 that you guys have eliminated in level 1, that is our general annual budgeted contribution to that. And so my question is, we have money in there. Can we then put that back into the general fund for operating expenses or not at all?
No, the funds that have already been designated need to stay in that fund.
Because if you close, so some of what's on our capital improvement plan is maybe a roof for Nat Borough. Well, if you end up closing that school, you don't need a roof for Nat. So some of those funds, when really what good is if I can't pay my electricity, what good is my savings account for my roof 10 years from now? It's not any good. And so, really just eliminating sticking money into savings. If the community doesn't want to support our referendum on an operating level, then they'll have to support it on a capital level, or we'll have to close the schools, in my mind. I don't really see another way around it. And I think you guys were pretty concerned, what you picked here, we're so lean already that I don't think there's a lot that you can really do to reduce the budget. And I think you did a good job here. I was quite surprised to see some of this, but in my mind, it's really about your savings versus what we can afford. And I really don't think freezing salaries or anything like that. We're not a factory. We don't, have machines we can extend the life of a filter or something like that. These are people who have lives, and they're the assets of this organization, and we can't not give wage increases. So I don't know, that's my 2 cents. I won't be here when this is all going down.
You'll still be in the knowledge.
Maybe I'll come and give a community comment. We'll plan one.
Sure. I was just gonna say, it sounds like this referendum talk is continuing, and it's potentially gonna happen in the future. I would just recommend, and I don't know if anybody's reached out to some of these districts that were successful. Obviously, we had some holes in our armor when it came to our referendum. But I think a lot can be learned from reaching out to other communities, other, board members, admin, whatever. And why was theirs successful and ours wasn't? And there's so many to choose from. I think that could really be beneficial moving forward, to potentially make ours successful next time. Just an idea.
And Mark, to that point, and I know this is not a referendum agenda item, but to that point, Like I mentioned, I don't think there's any question that the referendum that was held on February 20th was a large ask. To me, I think it was an opportunity for our community to determine if, we wanted our schools to be as well-funded as some of the other schools that are well-funded. And I think the community said loud and clear that, no, we can't afford it, and that's not the priority. I do think another referendum can be put together that is more palatable. And I have talked to many of the superintendents from around the area, and it also has to be considered that we have not had to rely on this. And this is such a big change for our community, whereas a number of the other schools that have passed referendums, they've already passed them before. It hasn't been as foreign to their community about what an operating referendum is and why it is needed. So I think that's part of it as well. But your point's very well taken. I certainly think there's things to learn, and I think we need to do that.
I think it's important that we don't talk about doing this or that or the other thing, right? That, we may very well talk about another referendum, and if it is a 4 or 5 year, and if it is a smaller ask, we're still going to need to make some kinds of cuts. Like Joe said, the community is saying, right? We said no to this status quo. And I think we really need to figure out how do we balance that with maintaining the experience, with maintaining the, quality of education for students, and maintaining, the desirability of Menomonie as a workplace for our staff. But it doesn't mean that we can ignore all of it. And then when it comes to the question of, are we putting our money, are we sort of defunding our Fund 46 or the savings account, right? We can do that for a little while. If we're saying, are we doing that versus, or are we using the fund balance for Fund 10, right? I think we're trying to have to talk about doing both. We can defund Fund 46 for a while, or delay funding Fund 46 for a while, but there's only so much of our Fund 10 operating balance that we can continue to use. So I think that we need to remember that we're talking about doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah, and to that point, Rachel, and Leah can correct me if I'm wrong, but we figure, there's about a $17 million fund balance, probably around $3.5 million. If it gets depleted by that much, we are going to be on the verge of borrowing, short-term borrowing, to handle cash flow throughout the year and to be able to make payroll. And, I talked about Chippewa Falls passing their referendum. Well, even with that referendum, they're still borrowing, I think it was about $9 million for their cash flow. And that can be done. So, some schools do that, but then you're paying hefty interest, and you're at the mercy of the interest rates as well. So, could the board spend that $17 million quite a ways down? Yes. But it will come with additional interest expenses. I do think the board has a little cushion to work with, and that was done on purpose. I mean, we knew that all this ESSER money and all the pandemic money was expiring. We were very careful in our recommendations to the board throughout the pandemic. So that's why we're entering this difficult situation in a good financial spot. And that's the real positive, as we enter this. This board has so much more flexibility than what a lot of boards across the state have had entering this time period. At the same time, it's just as important that this board is wise with what to do.
And I just want to emphasize that point, Joe and Lee and everyone on the VIN team. If you all hadn't been so dedicated the last decade in building up the fund balance, we'd be looking at levels 1, 2, 3, immediately, right? And the fact that, as Carl and Dale said, there is some flexibility here in terms of the fund balance. We can kind of scope things out. We can be a little careful and delicate and ways for a year, maybe stretch that to 2, but so the fact that we have that flexibility is a testament to the work that's been done on fiscal responsibility for a decade. And if that fund balance weren't there, and if we hadn't been so careful and so tight in budgeting, this would be a much worse situation. So thank you for that.
We haven't had to go to short-term borrowing for several years, which I think is really good, and that saved us, the district, quite a bit of money. So yes, I agree with that, and I think that's, thankful to our school district for, managing the money, as well as they can. The other thing I wanted to say is, I think the reason that we kind of, and this kind of came up in our discussions when we were talking about the $4.2 million recurring referendum, is we hoped that we wouldn't have to go again, because if you look at the other schools around us, how many times has they gone to referendum in the last 15 years? 4 or 5 times, and if we could have had that, we wouldn't have had to go again. And, so now we have to, I don't want to say dummy it down, but we have to maybe look at things a little differently to see what our community will support.
I shared this with Rachel, I had sent her this link. Superior School District laid off 25 teachers, did not renew 25 teachers, 15 elementary, 10 secondary, and there was an additional, thought it was 40 paras or something. They were facing a $4 million budget deficit, and their choice, I don't know their circumstance, I don't know, clearly they didn't have cash on hand. And so this is not a problem, I think, that we're gonna solve a 3 or a 4 year plan that we can be 100% confident in. What we know is that we also heard from the community, they want good outcomes. We've heard, the same people saying that we overpay our teachers are saying, but look at, your outcomes aren't that great, so pay them less. That makes no sense either, frankly. So we need to survive through this year. We can do that. I don't support cutting academic services, teacher pay, positions while we have enough cash on hand with the level 1 cuts. And I think the board should be thinking about what's the next short-term step. I don't think we have to commit to, are we changing our whole mindset from trying to save capital money for our future and going to a fully capital referendum model, which a lot of other schools are in. We've been very successful in the model we have. We'll see if it survives the next 3 or 4 years, but certainly it can survive the next year with these changes.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to be looking at this list and being aware that, we will have a lot of discussions between now and the end of June. But being aware that, if we are really focused on these level 1 reductions for the coming school year and doing whatever we can to make it so that that's all we have to do in the coming school year, but knowing that some of these level 2 and 3 are potentially in our future depending on what.
And this discussion as a whole, for anyone who chooses to listen to the board meeting, should be incredibly enlightening. And when they can ask Joe and see this list, this is now going to be out there circulating, and it should be, as people are considering your discussions going forward.
And this will be published on board docs tomorrow morning.
And another point about the kind of timeline question is that one thing that struck me with this list is that it is very tempting, if I did just a moment ago, kind of think of it as like a timeline, but it really isn't, because some things on this list happen, could happen any day. Some things on this list might happen tonight or might not, right? Some things on this list could be deferred. So it's not like, if you kind of imagine what's the timestamp, what's the date on each of these decisions being made, if it were ever to be made, they're all over the place in terms of that, 146, we could decide in 2 weeks that we're gonna adjust it for this year, or we could decide it next year, or any meeting, essentially, we put on the agenda to discuss it, right? Likewise, things like the French program is discussed. That is, it sounds like essentially, fait accompli, right? It's right in that sense that just have it be like the person's retired. There's no opportunity to hire a new person, so that is complete. So
There was an English phrase.
I know. So it is worth thinking that, just mentally thinking through for each of these where we think it's a plausible idea or something we never want to do or something we feel is, we don't want to do, but we're pressured to do it based on the circumstances. It's also worth thinking through when would we have to decide that item? And is that going to be, is that next week? Is it this week? Is it in 2 months? Is it in 6 months? Is it in 2 years? They're all over the place.
I would say that if the board gets serious about considering levels 2 and 3, more work needs to be done to prioritize within those levels. Level 1 was pretty obvious. Level 1 are things that, again, they're not going to have a huge immediate impact for the most part. But when we start talking about levels 2 and 3, I really think some sub-leveling would need to be done. And actually, I think between levels 2 and 3, I think there needs to be some fluidity. So if that's something the board wants to direct at some point, we can do that. But I think you need to keep some flexibility when looking at levels 2 and 3.
I'm also curious in that process, how we can draw on both staff and community input. I know you've done a lot of good work working with staff and the admin team through the principals and so on. And also the QIC discussed this at length just last week, with a lot of very thoughtful comments from teachers and staff. There's some things that are really like community focused, like these questions about, fees, which is not a very large dollar amount, but it might be extremely important to different sub-communities. This is an example I want to use simply as an illustration. I don't mean to pick on anything in particular, but there's one thing in this list which is some low enrolled sports. And there's some things in this list which are more enrolled but more expensive sports, right? And that's the sort of thing where I don't want to pit sports against sports, but getting community input on how much do we want to spend on different activities, and where does the community feel those values and priorities is a very a challenging thing to get information on sitting in this room versus out in the community. So one thing I hope the board will think about as we look at this list is how can we get more authentic and enriched community input about these very subtle questions of priority, because we all have to make these decisions ultimately with your guidance, but it's also something where, I think we should reinvest in the idea of reaching the community for more input on all these topics.
Any additional thoughts on the budget brainstorming and cut list?
Rachel, if you don't mind, I just wanted to check in with the directors. We've had so many discussions about this. Is there anything that you feel like was left out of this discussion tonight? I think I hit it all, but okay, thanks.
I think it was, Joe, you just mentioned the possibility of kind of tiering, or further tiers within level 2 and 3. And I'm not sure if tonight is the right time for it, but I think it will be important to kind of, I guess I realized like if there were things you were really recommending, they'd be in level 1, I assume. But I also think that it's important to acknowledge that some of these things will be maybe an easier lift, or have lower impact than other things. So I do think it will be important to get some more information from you and the other staff on that.
And again, the preliminary budget is not approved until June. So this work will be happening up until, and through that point, actually. But we do have a big meeting tomorrow with all the principals. This list, along with some instructions, were sent to all staff members. We had staff input with our QIC group, but I'd be very interested tomorrow to hear from the principals. That'll help inform as well. But you're right. I mean, when you look at level 1, that reduced technology support, that was actually in level 2 2 weeks ago. And in working with our staff committee, that was bumped up to level 1 because we felt that was a reduction that could be made without significantly impacting the experience of our staff and what they're able to do with our kids. So we will continue to get staff input. We'll continue to modify this list. And I do think there will be some subgroupings that will come to the board before you consider the preliminary budget in June.
I just think, one last comment on our way out is, some of the small things, and I'm not saying it's a great dollar thing to increase admissions and passes. Joe mentioned, you maybe get 85 cents back on that. But at some point, some of the cuts or some of the belt tightening needs to be palpable to the community before they change their mind that there's been some belt tightening too. And if I go to a sporting event that was $5 last year, now it's $7, I say, I thought it was $5. Well, the referendum didn't pass, we're cutting budget, this is part of that. How does the community know that certain things are being adjusted? If we hide that from everyone, and they'll say, well, you're fine. So as you go forward, it's something to think about.
Any further comments on this agenda item? Right, then we'll move on to the action agenda. Our first item is approve revisions to policy 343.1, class size. I entertain a motion on this.
I so move.
So the motion, just to clarify, is to approve the policy update as written.
Yes.
Okay, so motion by Carl, second by Abe. Any discussion on this?
Rachel, I would just point out that I think this might set a record for the most meetings that a single policy has been on an agenda. And I think the input provided by the board was very helpful, and hopefully this finished product is what you wanted out of it.
Any questions or discussion on this policy, which we discussed at length last time? Which doesn't mean we can't discuss it length.
Was there any feedback at the QIC on this one, or was it even mentioned by anyone?
I mean, there's concerns about class sizes. I think people were pleased that the upper level cap was changed a bit. But that doesn't change the fact that, you know, we are seeing some burnout, especially with, you know, some of the highest needs. But no, I think it was understood.
Yeah, I think that you know, we still have a cap of 26 students in grade levels K1, 2 here. I think that there are teachers who feel like 26 is too much in a K1, 2 class. I think it's important that we have a policy that allows us wiggle room though too, right? If we capped that at 22 and we had to put 23, then we'd be looking at a policy change. And I think we don't want the board to be coming back and, you know, fiddling with our policies every year. So hopefully there are very few kindergarten rooms with 26 students in them, but I think that having a policy that allows that flexibility is important. Any additional discussion? Let's vote on this policy. And motion passes unanimously. All right, our next agenda item is approval of the staffing plan for 2024-2025. Just want to make a note, we have some added information that was put into Board Docs this afternoon. Hopefully everyone got a chance to see that. We did discuss this, but I'm not sure that there was a very clear consensus at the end of the last meeting. So I guess I'm ready to have a motion to start the discussion.
I would like to move, maybe for the sake of having that discussion, because there's some new information we didn't have last time, move to approve the staffing plan as presented, except to, for the sake of discussion at least, separate the additional maintenance employee and the accounting assistant from the other three. So I guess my motion would be to approve a staffing plan with the first three bullet points: bilingual para, elementary special ed, elementary behavior specialist, KFTE, but not including maintenance and business office. If nothing else, to emphasize the new details to hear about. Is that clear to anybody?
I think that,
We would need a second to Abe's motion.
well, actually, I think before you even do that, I think you just have to have a motion and a second for the original motion, and then you can amend it in the discussion. I think that's how that works, but
I don't think that's necessary. I think a motion on this action item is fine. We don't have to, you know, we don't have a motion on the table yet.
Like I said, I would like to hear why he wants to change, so I would make a motion to approve the original, and then I could need to amend it. I want to hear what.
Okay, we currently have a motion on the table that hasn't had a second yet. Do we have a second on Abe's motion? Okay. Motion fails for lack of second. Well, okay, you'll second Abe's motion?
Oh, no, it was just, I thought she had said that she made a motion to accept it.
Okay, let's take this one at a time. Dave made a motion, it does not seem to have a second. You weren't seconding Dave's motion.
No.
Okay,
So the answer is-
now Angie.
I'll make a motion to
Pass it as
As presented. All right, do a second for that motion.
Second.
Okay, motion by Angie, second by Amy, to consider the staffing summary as presented. And that, yeah, so and just to clarify, that includes all of the additional staffing, for a total of 6.65 FTE.
So the board reviewed this entire plan last time, and I was asked to provide some justification for the additional staffing and prioritize the additional staffing. Well, I think all the additional staffing is necessary. I would prioritize the bilingual paraeducator first, the elementary special education teacher to reduce caseloads at River Heights second, the elementary behavior specialists third, the major maintenance employee custodian at Menomonie High School, kind of a combined position, fourth, and the accounting assistant to the business office, fifth. I'm not sure, we already kind of talked about the needs of these positions, so I don't know if that's needed again. But I'm happy to take any questions or give additional details on any of those that you'd like to hear about.
So first of all, let me apologize for the confusion of my motion. I just wanted to find somebody to focus on those 2 points. Maybe I should have done it more easily. I'm curious, there's some, I think there's a detail here about the funding. I was concerned going into it when I heard this last about the kind of the funding burden of some of these positions. And then it looks like there's some detail about how that cost might be a little bit offset by relieving other burdens. So could you talk about the cost balance of the custodial and business office positions?
Yes, right now we contract out for almost all of the preventative maintenance that's done in our school district in terms of belts, filters. I'm not a maintenance expert, so I'm not quite sure what all the requirements are, but when you think of all the mechanicals that we have in our school district, we do have an energy manager who's doing a terrific job, and our energy manager is very well versed in how these mechanics work, as is our director of building and grounds. And with our contract coming up, Kevin Tomaszewski, our director of building and grounds, approached me and really felt that many of those maintenance items could be handled in district. We also know that the high school has never been used as much as it has been this past year. There's been 379 hours so far this school year that the high school has been under operation during the weekends, requiring additional custodial staffing. So we have had situations where we have several custodians working overtime, and in some cases, working multiple weeks in a row without a day off. And that's really not acceptable. So in talking with David Kyle, the head custodian at the high school, he met with Kevin Tomaszewski and myself last week to kind of share his thoughts about some of the needs that are happening at the high school, and his desire to ensure that the high school custodial crew is able to, really instead of just work on a survival emergency basis, actually do a good job cleaning the school and keeping it up in good repair. So between the additional needs and then also the ability to eliminate most of our maintenance contract for our mechanicals, we think that could pay for about half the position with the mechanicals, and then not having as much overtime would also play into this. I would stop short of saying that the new position would be fully funded, but a large portion of it would be. And what I can say is that it would have a large impact on the services we're able to provide and the overall culture and climate of our custodial staff, especially at the high school. One final thing to bring up on that is that the substitute pool for custodial staff is essentially zero. Sam, our HR director, shaking her head. So if we have someone that gets sick, if we have someone that gets injured, if we have someone that needs to take a personal day, we simply don't have someone to replace them. So we are constantly pulling our maintenance people in to, do really just empty garbage and things like that. So we are working to try to improve the substitute pool. Sam has been working at it. It has not been successful. If anybody wants to work as a substitute custodian in our school district, please reach out to us. But something has to happen, and we think this is, it's not a full solution. Really, we could use about 3 more people. But adding 1 person along with some of those duties with mechanical, we think is a reasonable solution.
Thanks for that clarification on that position. As we were just looking at Fund 46, is it fair to say that having more staff at the high school working in custodial maintenance services would potentially help keep things in better shape so that potential capital costs down the line might be able to be deferred? I mean, if we keep something from breaking, because it's actually being looked after, right? Is that potentially going to help us, or is that just a dream?
Yeah, I don't want to overdo it, Abe. One way or another, the preventive maintenance has been done and will continue to get done on those very expensive pieces. I think it would be more about, there are some safety issues. For instance, some of the tiling in the high school, it's an old building and it's a great building, but, we have tiles coming off a lot. And especially when you talk about them being on steps, those are some of the issues that, they really don't get to that in a timely manner. So from a, maybe a work comp standpoint or injury standpoint, there could be some savings there. But despite the staffing problems we've had, we still continue to prioritize the major mechanicals, but it's costing us more than what we should be paying because we have to contract it out. So I don't want to overemphasize it, but yeah, I think it's fair to say, I'm just not sure how much.
And then I also saw in the personnel consent agenda, there was a retirement, a resignation at the middle school maintenance. I believe. Is this a position that, if we have trouble filling positions at other buildings, does the maintenance staff move between buildings if necessary, or is it really dedicated to the high school?
This one here, we would really try to protect for the high school, especially on Mondays and Fridays, when the workload is peaking. But yes, we have talked about that as well as, a lot of the preventive maintenance stuff, it doesn't necessarily need to be done on a particular day. It could be put off a week or 2 as needed. So yes, this person could help assist, but really what it does is it frees up the other major maintenance people to probably help more in the other buildings. We would try to protect the high school as much as possible with this position.
I'm sorry I'm asking so much of you tonight, but can you discuss the business office position a little bit?
Yep, and this is one we've been looking at for years. I know you mentioned last meeting, every year when we have our audit, one of the suggestions from the auditors is to, look for more ways to segregate duties. I do want to point out, this would not all of a sudden take that finding away. We would probably have to add about, Leah, how many people do you say we'd have to add? Probably 3 people to totally take it away. And schools pretty much always have that kind of finding. But we do think this would lead to some major improvements in that area. But more importantly, with all the additional reporting we now have with the Affordable Care Act, with all the staffing reports that have to be sent into the state, with all the different benefit designs that we have, going to a high deductible health plan, that's a whole nother thing. We are self-funded insurance. Now we have these HSAs to manage. There's really too much to manage with the current staff we have. We did reduce a position a few years back. We had a part-time position, and there was retirement, and we did not hire it back. We have tried to reallocate a number of different times. Really, there's a weekly meeting with the business department trying to talk about how things can be reallocated. And really, I think we've kind of reached the end where additional help is needed. We could continue to operate like we are, but we are seeing delays in some important paperwork. It impacts our ability to hire quickly. It impacts our ability to run efficiently. It impacts our ability to serve our buildings and make sure that, people have the email system set up for them, the rights that they need to have. It all is kind of a process, and, without enough staffing to process things in a timely fashion, it slows things down and ends up causing problems at the building level. So we could continue operating this way. That's why it's the lowest priority, but it would have a significant impact. Lastly, I want to talk about cross-training. we've been very fortunate with the terrific workers we have here. But if we end up having someone out for, a longer period of time or on a payroll week, we would run into pretty big problems. We don't have as much repetition as what I would suggest.
Thank you for that detail. Yeah, we've heard a lot about paraeducators and behavior specialists in many recent meetings, and haven't really dug into these positions, so thank you for that.
This should be an easy question. These positions are already in the proposed budget?
Not all of them.
What's the difference to the budget that's not in there yet?
I'm not 100% certain on that, Carl. It really depends on what the board wants to do with this. But I don't know the answer to that question tonight. A lot of it will depend on how the positions would be hired. The behavior specialist, ideally we would have a teacher with certain training that would be available. That would be more expensive. It also depends on what kind of insurance someone might take. There's a significant difference between the cost of someone who takes insurance and someone who doesn't. So I don't have an accurate figure for you tonight.
I think we just finished discussing an unpleasant list of potential cuts. And I think that there is ample justification to add all of these positions, and I think we just need to be mindful of where we're at in our budget situation as we think about what we do next.
That's the tricky part.
With regard to the behavior specialist, has there been discussion of adding only one behavior specialist, for example, and like what that might achieve? Obviously, 3 is ideal, and would 1 be better than what we have right now, for example?
Tony could speak to it as well. I really think that 1 is not sufficient. I hate to say I'd rather have you do 3 or none, but that's kind of how I feel, because trying to predict where that person would be stationed or trying to have them serve 3 schools is really not a feasible position. We don't have behavior specialists now. To me, if the board really wants to cut back on this, items 1 and 2, I think, are almost non-negotiable. Items 3, 4, and 5, I think if the board feels it's important to cut back and potentially wait for new revenue from a referendum or from the state or whatever, I think that would be reasonable. But no, I would not play with the recommendation of going from 3 to 1.
Thanks for that information.
Joe, because these are not contract renewals, right? These are only positions. They wouldn't have to be decided by May. If the board said 1 or 2 of these, we want to table and discuss further as things evolve, we could add at any time, right?
Yeah, I think hiring could get tricky, especially with the behavior specialist and the special ed teacher. But yeah, I think that's a reasonable idea. I would suggest moving forward, especially with the special education teacher at River Heights, in terms of timing. I think finding a special education teacher, the longer we go, the more difficult that's going to be. I suppose you could probably say the same thing about elementary behavior specialist, but the special ed teacher at River Heights, I think, is the one that is probably the most urgent in terms of timing.
When you consider behavior specialists, will this help eliminate some of the heavy need that we have for paraeducators in some of our schools? I mean, will some of these kids that are on the edge of needing, more close support from a paraeducator help them to be more independent?
That would be the hope, yes.
There could be some savings from not needing as much supervision, potentially.
Would it be, I think the point that was just made is an interesting one, it kind of ties into what Abe said earlier about the kind of timestamp on the various decisions we have to make. And it seems like if you're hiring a paraeducator and a, special education teacher, that pretty much would be ideal to happen with the school year calendar, whereas a maintenance position, for example, if somebody is already working in education, maybe they are also paying attention to the school year calendar, but it could be a position we might approve adding later in the year.
I think that's reasonable, and I don't think the high school is gonna be as busy in the spring and into the summer in terms of weekend activities. It sure would be nice to have an extra custodian on staff for the summer with all the summer cleaning and stuff that has to go on, but we could handle it.
Do we typically hire seasonal custodians anyway, or not?
He tries to hire some seasonal work for mostly grass cutting and painting.
So with that additional context, I think I do want to propose an amendment to approve the pay plan with the first, I think I lost, staff plan, with the first 3 bullet points. But the amendment would be to separate the last 2, which it sounds like we can consider those out of the school year cycle. So the amendment would be to separate the last 2, the maintenance and the accounting assistant, to reconsider a later date. Whereas the top 3 seem like both high priorities to get those into the school year hiring plan. Is that clear for Stephen?
We need a second to the amendment.
I would second the amendment.
Not actually.
If you need that.
We need a second to the amendment, okay. Any discussion of the amendment itself?
Just to clarify, we're going to keep the bilingual paraeducator, the special education teacher, and the behavior specialist in, but the last 2 no, for now. Okay, thank you.
And so can you elaborate then on your reasoning for amending this? It's because of the expense?
Partially the expense, but I think partially to, I think it was Carl's point about the, these will all be very beneficial, of course. But in terms of the timeline and the decisions we have to make, the maintenance custodial and the accounting assistant positions are not as locked to the academic calendar year as the other 3 are. And so as we consider other budget priorities, those 2, we could say essentially anytime, yes, now is when we approve hiring a custodian. That could happen in
So do you know how much our custodian wages are as compared to what the wages are out? And it's gonna be, they're not gonna just find someone overnight like that. If you think you're gonna improve it, and in 3 weeks, they're gonna have a new maintenance custodian that's gonna be fully trained in and know all of our facilities and learn the ropes for next year, it's not gonna happen. So I would disagree with your amendment and let them manage the onboarding process so that the person can be trained and up to speed and it's most efficient for the district. But because they're not gonna easily find somebody at our wages.
I guess one thought to Angie's point, and one concern I have, and this goes with the behavior specialist as well. It won't surprise me if we see some internal promotion and internal movement. And that's not to say that I'm disagreeing with Abe's amendment. Because there is time, excuse me. Another bottle of water. There is time, I mean, thank you very much. But I do think we need to keep, 2 bottles of water. Then I'm gonna throw the bathroom. Thanks, yeah, throw it I think you get my point. The point is that there does need to be enough time. It doesn't necessarily have to be April of 2024, but I wouldn't put it up right to the school year.
Yeah, to elaborate my reason a little bit, again, as we look at level one, possibly dipping into level two reductions from the previous discussion, there are a lot of small dollar number amounts in the great scheme of things that are 1, 2, 3 FTE around. Again, my biggest hesitation is to commit to something when it shuts off future avenues that we really need to explore a little bit. So it's not that I don't think those positions are valuable. I think they are valuable as discussed. But I think it's a spot where we have some flexibility in the time of the position. And if that could be, June or even July after we close out the fiscal year and maybe have a little more information. If it could be August, we know, or, the fall, we start knowing about enrollment numbers and things start to firm up in terms of the budget for next year. It's a point of flexibility, which I think we can survive with in terms of staffing and workload, especially the clerical position where I think that it sounds like, basically the question is, we maintain a fairly difficult but existent status quo, or we add some help in that area. And I think they are all valuable positions, but I think the flexibility of timing is something that we can really use to help us not have to kind of overcut later.
So you just heard her comment say we could potentially use 3 people to appease the audit, and they're asking for 1 and an accounting assistant, and then even the custodian, which will be partially paid for by savings from not having to use the subcontractor. So I guess, the staff is putting forward what they feel like they need to have this next year be successful. And I feel like you're second guessing their judgment. And so in my mind, I would vote no to your amendment.
First I agree. But I was thinking about if we put that off, like you suggested, June, July, that really messes up the budget for next year. You gotta make some decisions in that budget. It's just going to compromise that because they don't know what the board's going to do about those 2 positions. And so, I think with that in mind, I think I go with Angie's reasoning.
The budget that we're referring to is like -3 million currently though, so like 3.5. So I think that's part of it, is that it's not saying we don't want to hire these, but since we don't absolutely need to put them out by May, we could extend it into the summer so that we have time to look through our levels, to look through how we're going to manage $1 million deficit. I don't think it's fair to suggest that we don't trust people saying what they need. We also have to balance those with the fact that we're also responsible for finding a way through. And I do really support the idea of, it's difficult for me to support the idea of adding 6.65 FTEs when we're still kind of really haven't committed to what we're going to cut. If we're committed to a referendum, and even if we're really committed to it, we don't know that it will pass. So I really would value the extra time to give us a chance to sort of prioritize where things are laying out. I don't think that there's as much of a pressing need to add these extra. I would be okay with even a little more time for all of them, but I do think that, at a certain point, we have to say yes to those 3. But I think we're just asking for a little more time to help give us a chance to prioritize things.
I guess the only thing I'd like the board to consider additionally is that, and I know that this is so much to think about, but when we talked about this at the last meeting, you know, there was no indication that there wasn't support for those positions. And I don't know that there's other things in the cut list that we want to offer ahead of the positions that are on the staffing plan. And I guess that's a little concerning, is that if you approve the staffing plan, some of the other positions that the administration would potentially recommend reducing before those other positions would already be locked in with the approval of the staffing plan tonight. Are you following me on that? Like example, you know, one of the ones we heard at the QIC meeting was the high school English language arts interventionist. And I know I already kind of talked a little bit about that tonight. I guess, you know, there hasn't been a balancing test to determine, you know, how would that line up as opposed to, you know, the additional clerical or the custodian one that's almost paid for anyway, or even the behavior coaches for that matter. And I know it's here in a tough position because we're also saying we need some decisions so we can issue teacher contracts and meet the May 15th state deadline. So I'm not saying anybody's at fault. I'm just saying that if we're going to start piecing the staffing plan together, we're doing so without really full knowledge of how these things balance against the entire plan.
So in that case, I guess I don't understand what you would prefer to see us do in that case. I mean, are you suggesting we not approve the staffing plan at all tonight because you need more time? Like, would it solve the problem to table the staffing plan until we have more clarity on some of the potential cuts?
That's a tough question because we're up against that state deadline on May 15th to issue teacher contracts. What I wish we could do is rewind back to the last meeting and know that there were some that, there was some concern about some of them. We can't do that, obviously.
Well, I believe the concern came up because of the cuts we just looked at,
Mm-hmm.
okay?
Yeah, and that's
You know,
that's legitimate.
I think we were all for it last time, but we had no idea what the cuts were gonna look like in the $3.5 million until the night.
Maybe a fair question to ask ourselves is, if I'm willing to table that, to reconsider in the next 3 to 4 months, what would it take for me to say yes in 3 to 4 months versus saying yes now? There's not gonna be new revenue coming in. So we can, again, it's all about what you all pick for long-term strategy for this budget by June. We can pay for these one way or the other this year. So the question is, if we do postpone it, and maybe I planted the seed of postponing it by asking my question, which really wasn't my intention. I wasn't thinking about it. I just want to know if we could. You know, what would it take, Gabe, to say yes in 3 or 4 months? Because I do believe that we need the clerical help. I do believe that we need the janitor help. There's not a question of that. You know, I do want to support the people that do the work, telling us what they need to be successful.
I guess what I'm suggesting is that if you're gonna postpone some of the positions, I do think you may wanna look at the cut list and postpone a few other ones instead of approving them tonight as well. And I would suggest, the high school English language arts interventionist, the elementary health assistants.
Yeah, I was reluctant to point out particular FTEs in the chart, but that's exactly what I was thinking as I was talking about the question of postponing. Because one thing that I have not yet particularly processed myself, and I'm really never having this discussion, is if there were a line item on here that says reduce high school maintenance staff by 1 FTE, where would it be? Right, I see there is under level 2, there's reduced clerical at NHS by 1 FTE. So, okay, that's not the same as it's not the same as the maintenance, it's also not, even though it's at NHS, it's not the same as the financial clerical, even though it's clerical, but it is sort of a comparable line item, that here's a staff, which, that is, a reduction of staff in a particular location and a particular type of work with a particular dollar amount attached. And if there were a line item that said, no, we could save, X dollars in this list by reducing maintenance, I don't think I have, I'm not sure where I would put it in that list. Now, my impression from the administration's recommendation is that actually they put that kind of up, like, it wouldn't be a reduction on the list because it would be, or maybe be down the struck out part, right? Something that we don't think is worth doing, because it's actually a higher priority to that position than even, level 1 cuts. And I think that is a totally fair thing. That's basically Angie's referring to, is that's implicit in here. And that's why I wanted to emphasize that question and have Joe explain the positions in a little more detail. So yeah, I'm not sure where all that to say, in my very long-winded way, that I think what I'm really looking for is a little more time to process that. The top 3 bullet points, I think we've heard many times a clear need for those positions in a way that's quite desperate in some of the schools in some ways. These 2 bullet points, they are important, and I guess the question I'm asking myself is, where are they in your reduction list, if they were there?
I think it's also important to acknowledge that any cuts that we make are going to be putting more pressure on everybody who's already in their places. And so having it's not the first time we've heard that we need more maintenance help. And if we're gonna be making cuts in maintenance land and dumping less into the capital improvement fund, we want that to be fully, strong and ready to handle what's about to come. I feel the same way about the accounting system. There's been so much additional work with all of, when you don't have enough money, it means a lot of extra running of numbers and spreadsheets and things that I don't like to do. And so I think it's gonna get really tough, and we all know that, and being in a position where the staff is feeling good about the plan is really important.
Let's vote. I'll call the question.
Yeah, so the vote would be on the motion as amended.
Can we hear it again?
Point of clarification, can I actually ask a procedural question? Thank you. Is it possible, so it's not clear to me, where kind of people overall came down the question of separating the 2. I think there's lots of very good points. Right, but are we voting on the addition of the amendment itself, and then we can go back to the original motion?
Correct.
If the amendment fails?
I think if the motion as amended fails, we would need a new motion, and then we could vote on the new motion.
Okay.
Goes back to
Right, goes back to the old motion.
Okay.
So I just want to check that procedure so we're all clear.
Okay.
Could we do a verbal on the amendment?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion as amended is we had a motion to approve the staffing plan as presented, which was amended to include only the top 3 bullet points of additional positions, which would include the bilingual paraeducator at 0.65, the elementary special ed teacher to reduce caseload at River Heights, and the elementary behavior specialists. That is the amendment.
Dale Dahlke,
No.
Rachel Henderson.
That's not usually. Top of the top of the list. Sorry. No.
Mark Hillman,
No.
Amber Kirsting,
No.
Carl Palmer,
No.
Amy Riddle Swanson,
Yes.
Angie Skillings,
No.
Gabe Smith,
Yes.
and Dominique Stewart. It was 6:30, yeah, 6:30. Or 3:06.
So the motion fails 3-6. Do we have additional discussion on the original amendment of passing the staffing plan, excuse me, as presented? Yeah, to the point you made earlier, Joe, about the staffing plan as presented includes a number of things that are on the cut list, right? Is it accurate to say that the staffing plan that we would approve represents kind of the maximum staffing? And that if there were, for example, if there's smaller classes or whatever, there is potential that there would be fewer hired at some point. Does that allow the board and the administration permission later on down the road to eliminate some of these positions? If that was, became or seemed necessary?
Okay, so to answer your question, yes, this would be the maximum staffing allowed without additional approval from the board. Our intention, though, would be to fill the staff as presented with the plan, with the exception of enrollment figures not needing as many staff as what's in the plan. And we do that every year. The elementary level this year is a good example. We have 2 grade levels where staffing was approved, but because of our class size policy and because what our anticipated enrollment was, we did not fill all those positions. So, especially with those types of situations, we would maybe not fill. But in terms of like behavior specialists and those, we would work to start filling those right away. Now, to your question though, Rachel, not all employee agreements are full year agreements. When we talk about hourly employees, I believe it's, how many days notice, do you remember? Is it 30 days notice?
Yes, you have to provide us, we have to provide them 30 days notice, is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Yes, that's correct.
So for instance, with the custodial maintenance one, if I'm just giving you a for instance, if the district went to referendum in November and if the referendum failed, and if the board felt it was critical to start reducing right away, the board could consider all the non-contracted positions for a potential reduction and give 30 days notice.
Any additional discussion on the staffing plan as presented? Right, let's vote. Motion passes unanimously. Next up, we have approved SBMA pay scales and issuance of employee contracts for 2024-25, and I think it was just, we decided during the agenda order that this will not, the vote we take tonight or take in the open session will not include the district administrator's contract. So, we'll be looking at approval of a pay increase that would apply to all of the other groups that presented.
I'll make a motion to approve as presented.
I'll second that.
And as presented, just to clarify, that is with the 4.12% CPI increase, that's what you meant, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Discussion on this question.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about this question over the last couple of weeks, especially because this is the question of whether to do this or not is the first thing in level 2, the highest number in level 2. So an alternate option would be to limit wage salary increases to the steps only and not include the CPI. Which would save $522,463, which is a big chunk of money. So I was trying to think about this question from a lot of different perspectives, and the thing that it came down to in my mind is that our staff are, absolutely crucial to the school. As Carl said a while ago, it's a people business. And if we can't, especially in an environment where all of our neighbors are going to have more competitive pay scales, I think we basically, and thinking about the strategic choice we have in terms of how are we going to make budget reductions in the future. One budget reduction we could make would be to reduce the salary, that reduce the pay plan to only steps. After thinking it through a lot, I think actually that would not be a good idea. I think actually we should do the plan as presented. And the main reason is that if we don't remain competitive in pay, we're going to lose people from all different areas, all different specialties, based on the market, job opportunities, and things we cannot control. We will have to make cuts to staffing. I think that's virtually certain in any future. We're going to have to make cuts to staffing. But I think it's important that we do that carefully and thoughtfully, the way we were just discussing, in a way that we plan, and not kind of just accidentally because people leave on a whim. It is a significant budget question. And as Carl said, we do have some leeway in terms of the Fund 10 balance. And we were, I think, told by the public that the Fund 10 balance doesn't need to be as high as it is. And I think the most important thing we can invest that in is our people, personally. So that's where I kind of came down after thinking hours and hours and hours about exactly this question.
Well said, Abe. I agree with you.
Yay. Let's vote.
Additional discussion on anything else folks want to say before we vote. All right, then let's vote. Motion passes 8-1. Next on the agenda, we have 4K programming agreements. And it looks like, oh, we have an update regarding one of the site partners, but otherwise it looks like nothing has changed since our last meeting. Is that correct?
Make a motion we approve as presented.
Second?
Right, motion by Carl, second by Amber. Discussion on 4K programming agreements. Nothing. We did discuss this last time, so that's fine. And motion passes unanimously. Finally, last item on our agenda, our action agenda, we have 2023-2024 budget revisions. Hear from you, right? Oh, sorry, entertain a motion to approve the 2023-2024 budget revisions.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Abe, second by Amy, Anthony, somebody. Angie.
Yeah.
Leah, do you want to just point out some of the updates since last time the board reviewed this?
Sure. I highlighted the changes in yellow, and it's basically, the various school sites continue to request budget transfers between one account to another, so it's a net zero impact on the budget overall. There were those items, and then there was, 2 grants that also had some budget revisions as well. So, like I say, those are highlighted in yellow, otherwise it's everything, that we discussed the last time.
Thank you for that. Any discussion on the budget revisions or questions for Leah? All right, seeing none, let's vote.
I think with everybody putting their coat on, I think we're saving money. Let's see.
Oh, no. We lost the signal.
Somebody turned the heat back.
We turned out. It's been here so long.
All right, motion passes unanimously. All right, on to the discussion agenda. We have first, we have our clerk's report from the spring election.
The Board of Canvassers met to certify the election results. Emily Hines had 2,587. Angela Wolf had 2,586. Michelle Dupree had 2,682. And Josie Pellman had 611. And so we will have, at our next meeting, we'll have new board members, Emily Hines, Angela Wolf, and Michelle Dupree.
Thank you, Dominique. Any questions or discussion on the spring election results? All right, seeing none, we have a review of the annual technology department report. Katie, who's been waiting very patiently for a long time.
So we are a department of 6 for our IT staff. Myself, we have a data specialist, and she also manages, she's the first point of contact for our help desk, would be Morgan Segment. We have 2 system administrators that handle most of our server environment and help troubleshoot our network. And then we have 2 help desk staff members who spend most of their time in the buildings assisting with classroom technology and student technology. Let's see. I have some metrics on our Google Suite, and you can see that Our overall storage went down a little bit this year because we've really been trying to clear out files from shared drives and things that aren't used anymore. Google does now charge for storage. It used to be unlimited for schools, and that's changing, so we've been a little bit more conservative with how we use our drives and how much space we give everyone, just so we're conscientious of those numbers. Google Classroom is a little lower, but I think sometimes that goes up different times of year. Sometimes clubs or different athletic teams use it, so that does tend to fluctuate, especially between semesters. But you can see the amount of drive files that we're creating has gone up quite a bit. And we're still maintaining those storage levels. So that means that as we're creating a bunch of documents, we're maybe removing old documents that we don't use anymore. With our device access, you can see kind of our ratios there. That's been pretty stable over the last, I would say, 5 years. That's pretty typical of our numbers. Help desk statistics, the student tickets have gone down this year. Part of that is that our 612 students do have new Chromebooks, so we don't get as many tickets for different repairs because they're newer devices. And then same thing with staff. I think because we're not spending so much time repairing Chromebooks, we're able to be in the buildings more often, and so some things get taken care of more proactively where they don't need a ticket. Right now we do have building technology coaches, so those numbers are listed there. They're utilized probably most heavily in our staff meetings at buildings to share things that are happening and provide general feedback. But we do have a lot of other methods too of addressing our technology, especially, after COVID, we did spend a lot of time getting into Google Classroom, and they were more heavily used at those times, but I think now most of our classroom technology has stabilized. Cybersecurity staff training, we did switch platforms this last year as part of a cost savings. I think we saved $15,000 by switching from KnowBe4 to InfoSec. Our staff, as a result, this program is a little more automated, so they get fished quite a bit more often. And they also level things, so they look at, not that they're intentionally trying to trick people, but they use more of, they'll send out like Google Meet links or, things that we're utilizing. So that it's a little bit more tailored to our environment. So you can see it's really kind of stabled out. Like at the beginning, I think our staff clicked on a lot of things because they were getting fished a lot more often, a lot more frequently. And it's gotten a lot better, but our numbers are still a little bit higher than last year as a result of some of that transition and things being more tailored. But I think our staff overall do a really good job. I always include a page on the cybersecurity threat landscape. You can see education is a huge target, and I spend a lot of time, I'm part of the Wisconsin cybersecurity response team, and so we meet monthly. We talk about all the compromises at public entities, so counties, hospitals, schools, cities, and I mean, the numbers are like staggering for our public entities just because the cost of some of the cybersecurity tools are very high. And so you're kind of weighing that against if you do have a compromise. And so we work really hard with the funding that we do have to try to make that go as far as possible. And so there are a lot of things that don't cost a lot that can make a big difference, like having the multi-factor on our email accounts. And I can tell you a lot of the schools that are getting hit, and The reason we see that high rate is because they don't have a second form factor, and it's really easy to click on something. And then some highlights this year, we did make some other switches. We use GuideStar. We had a software that was a little more expensive last year. It was a little cumbersome to use. It basically scans all of our devices in network to make sure that there's nothing malicious on those devices, or there aren't patches that we missed, or something needs to be updated. So this year we have a company, they meet with us monthly, they review all the results with us, and it's still less expensive than the software we have been using in the past. And that's one of our cyber requirements for our insurance, so it's really nice to have it as a tool. We also use a free tool with the cybersecurity agency. It's basically through Homeland Security for the state of Wisconsin. They do external scans. There's no cost to that, or our tax dollars have already paid for that. And so we get a monthly report where they're looking at it from outside our network. And that's really helpful too. This year, we created family and staff guides for translation tools. We've been working really hard to review district web pages. And again, while I'm looking at a lot of that, I don't always know the updated content, but we're looking at how often should things be updated. Are things consistent between our buildings as far as what information we're providing? If things aren't being updated, do they need to be there? So those conversations are happening at least monthly. We are in the process of updating some of our networking equipment. We do that through E-rate funding. Because of our free and reduced rate, we do get a 70% discount on some of those tools. So we have kind of a 5-year budget. We're nearing the end of that, so we're kind of running out of that funding on these replacements. But between that and Fund 46, we've been able to update things, and then, that equipment's good until we hit that next cycle of E-rate funding. They are also looking, so as we go into the next 5 years, they're looking at trying to fund some cybersecurity tools out of that too. So you're not just buying hardware, but it might also provide some funding or discounted rates for other tools or services that we're required to have. We are in the process of refreshing staff MacBooks and desktop computers. So it's a lot of imaging right now in our department. So you'll see a lot of things getting inventoried, and computers being prepped for the next school year over the summer. Through our capital improvement fund, middle school classrooms are getting new interactive displays. So we really worked closely with middle school staff to select the panels, spent a lot of time doing walkthroughs with the vendors so that we know what's being installed and where. And they're assisting with some of that, again, to take some of the rough maintenance for the summer. But we're doing as much as we can ourselves and removing some of the current equipment ahead of them coming in. So that it's kind of a balanced approach to getting those installed. Some other upcoming goals, we continue to work on our disaster recovery planning and try to achieve any redundancy with as little cost as possible throughout the district, so if things go down, we have backups. Another move that we're looking to make budgetarily, so a lot of the software that we use does increase quite a bit at once, and we often have to pivot with our IT budget. So a current product that we use is going up to probably more than $15,000 for next year. And so we can switch to another product. It won't cost us anything but training and retooling in our department. So we are planning on making that shift. And it's kind of a complicated software, but basically it's a web interface that allows us to access our virtual machines. So the way that we look at that will be different moving forward, but we get trained next week, so it's kind of exciting. And then again, we continue to promote effective technology integration in the curriculum through professional development. We're looking at doing some work with AI in April and starting some guidance and conversations around that. And then I think we'll have one more closet that needs to get done at the high school next year, as well as the switches at Oakland. And then we'll be fully refreshed on the cycle and good to go for probably 7 years before we have to start replacing network equipment again. Any questions?
Regarding the number of active Google Classrooms, you said that might change. Sounds like it's sort of a snapshot whenever you're making this report, right? And, I mean, I know, like, I'm involved in my son's science Olympiad, for example, so I know we've got an extra Google Classroom for that, and presumably that goes away at some point. Do you think that teacher uptake, and in particular at like the high school and middle school, has been good and has stayed good? Like, are people using it in the classroom for that kind of like basic education purpose at a pretty consistent rate, do you think?
Yes, I think so. And I think it does fluctuate between semesters too, because it depends on like their last login. So, you know, some classes use it more heavily than others, just depending on, you know, what things that they're pushing out. But I would say especially our core classes tend to use it a lot, but I know even our specialists do collect things within the classroom quite a bit.
And Rachel, I'd like to just mention, there's been a lot of improvement at the high school with the use of Google Classroom. Something Mr. Drake and I have been talking about a lot the last couple of years. I still think there's room for growth, but I've been very impressed with our teachers getting more consistent. So as a parent, you know, you can go on and check every one of your child's classes, and many of our teachers now have kind of a summary document, which makes it much easier, much quicker for parents to see what's going on, what assignments are due, what tests are coming up. So I think that's been a huge improvement, and I'm looking for continued growth in that area.
I think Google continues to integrate it better. You know, it is easier to combine the use of Google Calendar with Google Classroom. It automates some of those things between tools for our students and staff.
It always blows me away that between staff and students, you're managing 3,768 Chromebooks. Right, like my kid has one, and then think about multiplying that times 3,700, breaking, and the dog carries it over here. That it's mind-boggling, and yes, I think the community should know there's almost 4,000 Chromebooks in our school.
Yes, thankfully, from a technology and updating standpoint, Chromebooks are very easy, but we're human and there are accidents for sure.
Something maybe to discuss in the future, let's start thinking about it. And obviously, there's been a lot of discussion tonight about Fund 46, and a lot of the line items in Fund 46 come out of technology. And you know, this is not a question to answer right now, but there'll probably be lots of discussions about if Fund 46 starts to dwindle in 3 years or so, how, you know, I mean, look at network maintenance, Chromebook replacement, those questions, I think, will be considerations in how much to maintain in Fund 46, because those are things that, you know, we need to maintain. You know, if the network switch goes down and you don't have high availability on your network, the schools, you know, it's like losing electricity at this point, right?
Right.
And with Chromebooks, you know, if we start to, you know, have a replacement problem over time, that's going to directly impact student access. And so in the Fund 46 discussion, capital improvement discussion, that's one of the things, you know, we've been talking about priorities of people and positions, but this is also about capital and what most directly affects students in terms of capital. So thank you for everything you do. Something for us to think about as a board.
And I think, well, that's part of why I highlighted too, is like, we're all, as administrators managing budgets, you know, there's an increase here, we're all looking for ways to mitigate that, where we're maintaining a level of service, you know, while maintaining the budget.
Thank you, Katie.
Nice job.
If there's no more questions for Katie or discussion, we'll move on to discussion of defeasance for long-term debt.
So I'm sure Leah could chime in as well, but to try to summarize this in a relatively efficient way, to really prioritize how we manage long-term debt. And there's been all sorts of refinancing, defeasance, et cetera. And we have another opportunity coming to us. Leah has worked with Baird, our financial consultant, and with the way we have managed our long-term debt, we have the opportunity to essentially defease $1 million of future debt payments and essentially put those funds in escrow until the call date of 2028. By doing so, we would save approximately $180,000 in future interest. And Leah and I have reviewed this. Leah met with our advisor, went through it in great detail, and we're recommending that the board go ahead and do this and save our taxpayers $180,000. We just did this not too long ago, and we're able to save $782,000. We had more to work with at that point. We have not built up the ability to do more than what we're suggesting, but we still think it's a good opportunity to take advantage of that right now. So the idea would be is for the board to approve it at the next school board meeting. But before we bring that forward, are there any questions, concerns, or suggestions?
Like no questions on that. Next up, we have items related to next meeting dates, board committees, and reports. We have quite a bit coming up. Next Monday, April 15th, there is no school for students, professional development for staff. That day, we have a health and medical committee meeting here at 3:15. The following day, April 16th, is the WASB new board member gathering at 7 p.m. at the middle school library. That's intended to help orient new board members, but any board members are welcome to attend that as well. I do think WASB has a RSVP out there, but I'm not sure if it matters. April 22nd, we'll have our reorganization of the board meeting at 5 p.m. here, followed by the special school board meeting at 5:45. April 29th, the diversity committee meets here at 3:45 p.m. In May, we have our regular school board meeting at 5:45. We have the retirement mixer. I should also note, at this point, our only scheduled school board meeting in May is the 13th, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And we'll have a retirement mixer at 4 p.m. at the middle school on May 22nd. May 27th is Memorial Day, so there will be no board meeting that day. There is additional information about the retirement mixer attached to board docs.
Leah, the health medical committee meeting is actually going to be on Thursday, the 18th. Correct. I'll change that in board docs. That's my error on that.
Just to clarify, do we have to let Jenny know that we're gonna come to that school board gathering at the library, or we just show up?
You can just show up. I mean, if you want to let us know as a courtesy, that's fine, but there's no registration, so anybody's welcome to just show up.
My mistake, I thought WASB had a registration link for that, but. Same question regarding the retirement mixer. Do you want board members to let you know if we'll attend?
That'd be great.
Okay.
And again, we're not gonna turn anybody away, but it's nice to know who's coming.
And all board members are welcome to attend that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Encouraged to.
It's a great event. All right, that brings us to the end of our open session agenda. We have a closed session scheduled. I guess I have a question for the board about whether we want to do this tonight. We have some fairly serious discussion to have regarding what we have in closed session, and I'd like to see if folks want to move forward with that tonight or table that until a future meeting date. Sure.
Can I make a motion to move to closed session?
Okay, we typically make the motion after recess.
If somebody is asking to have the table, there is no discussion, we just vote to have a table, and if everyone wants a table, it would leave the majority. If not, then we go into closed session.
Thanks for that.
It says right here on here.
Thank you.
I'm confused, are we in a recess or are we not?
We're not in a recess right now.
I would like to vote to table this.
I would second that.
Denise, you want to do a roll call for that?
Amber Kirsting,
Yes, I vote to table.
Carl Palmer,
No.
Amy Riddle Swanson,
Yes.
Angie Skillings,
No.
Abe Smith,
Yes.
Dominique Stewart. Yes. Dale Bugby,
Abstain,
Rachel Henderson,
Yes.
Mark Hillman.
No. That's a nice way to work.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank
that.
you guys.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Adjourn.
So there are some cupcakes for celebration of our